Beneath the glow of the nebula archives, deep within the orbital data citadel circling Proxima Centauri, archivist Kale adjusted his neurolink. His translucent skin shimmered faintly with anticipation. Today's assignment was not just another dead planet's record. Today, he was to dissect a node labeled Turkey, Terran Civilization Cluster, High Resilience Index. Earth, though quarantined, fascinated the Proxima historians. Despite its internal chaos and primitive weaponry, humanity had survived extinction multiple times. Kyle was curious. What made this particular civilization within Earth so enduring? With a thought, he summoned the historical simulation. Across the neural feed, a panorama unfolded. The landmass called Anatolia emerged, first as shadow, then shape, layer upon layer of empires. Hittites, Lydians, Greeks, Romans, all bled into one another like sedimentary echoes. But it was the Ottomans who dominated the simulation's tempo. From a minor Beylik, they grew into a superpower that ruled for centuries. Kale focused. From the ashes of the fractured Seljuk Sultanate, Osman emerged, a tribal leader no more significant than dozens of others. But where others raided and faded, Osman laid foundations. His successors seized Bursa, then Edirne, and with strategic brilliance bypassed and ultimately conquered Constantinople in 1453. The fall of the Byzantine capital wasn't merely a military maneuver, it was the rebranding of history. The city's transformation into Istanbul marked the irreversible transfer of power from East Rome to the Ottoman Crescent. This was not survival, it was metamorphosis. The projection sharpened. A young scribe named Halim moved through the halls of Topkapi Palace. Kyle fixated on him. Though not a ruler or general, Halim embodied the quiet force behind endurance, recorders, thinkers, architects of continuity. Through his eyes, Kale experienced the pulse of the empire, its diverse voices, laws, arts, and conflicts. Halim penned observations on Greek engineers building mosques, Kurdish governors negotiating peace in the east, Jewish physicians curing plague in imperial clinics. Diversity wasn't tolerated, it was institutionalized. But Kale also saw fragility. Succession wars, Janissary revolts, stagnation. As centuries passed, the empire calcified. The Sultan's reach grew ornamental. European powers encroached like rust beneath golden paint. Halim aged, his entries darkened. "We have the form," he once wrote, "but not the fire." Still, the Ottomans adapted. They modernized late, but strategically: railways, military schools, press regulations. Halim's grandson, Reza, became a translator for German engineers building Anatolia's infrastructure. Where swords had once ruled, now treaties and telegraphs dictated fates. Kale noted the inflection point. This wasn't just adaptation, it was foresight, learning to survive without conquest. A final simulation shift startled Kale. He was now seeing the empire from the eyes of an outsider, a Greek revolutionary named Eleni. Her people suffered under Ottoman rule, yet even she respected the system's uncanny ability to persist. "They absorb us," she whispered in her diary, "and yet remain Ottoman." The projection dimmed. Kale leaned back, overwhelmed. The central character, the conflict, yes, they were clear now. The Ottomans were the character. Survival through complexity and contradiction was the conflict. Kale documented his preliminary thought. Unlike most empires, the Ottomans mastered the art of folding resistance into identity. But this was only the beginning. A republic would rise from these ashes. A man named Mustafa loomed faintly on the edge of the timeline. Kyle would pursue him next. And yet, as the sim paused, Kyle found himself struck not by war or politics, but by Halim's final entry, etched in fading Arabic script. "We are not the end of the story. We are the soil from which another will grow." Kyle smiled. Earthlings, it seemed, never truly ended. only transformed. Reinserting the neural link, Kale dove back into the simulation where the empire was no more. The Republic had risen, modern, secular, ambitious. The year was 1923, and Mustafa Kemal Atatürk's vision was rewriting everything. Kale was curious. How did a civilization pivot so dramatically from centuries of theocratic imperialism to an aggressively secular state? In most systems he'd studied, such transformation required collapse and colonization. But Turkey had done it differently. It had rewritten itself. He selected a new observer, this time a young woman named Layla. Daughter of a former Ottoman officer, Layla now worked as a translator for the Ministry of National Education. Her Turkish was crisp, her French better, her Arabic faded. She wore Western clothing in public, recited old Sufi poetry in private. Through her, Kyle accessed a world in flux. The Turkish alphabet was changing. Arabic script was being replaced with Latin. Religious schools were shuttered. The fez was banned. Layla's father called these things sacrilege. Layla called them evolution. The central conflict unfolded in quiet spaces, within families, classrooms, village squares. Layla's cousin refused to speak anything but Ottoman Turkish. Her mother hid her veil under her coat when she left the house. Her professor warned her never to use Quranic metaphors in essays. Progress, he said, must leave ghosts behind. Yet Layla saw something tragic in the speed of change. Atatürk's reforms were sweeping, almost surgical. A new identity was being forged, but at what cost? In Ankara, Layla met Mehmet, a young officer loyal to the Republic. He was passionate, sharp, but rigid. To him, Turkey's survival depended on total severance from its Ottoman past. "We were sick," he told her. "Now we are cured. Don't mourn the fever." Layla, however, sensed something more complex. While she admired Atatürk's courage, abolishing the Sultanate, securing women's suffrage, establishing state-run industries, she also felt disoriented. Where did history go when it no longer fit the national narrative? Kale monitored the data feed closely. Republics, in his experience, often faltered during this exact moment, when zeal outpaced reflection. Yet Turkey didn't collapse. It stabilized, slowly, unevenly, democratically, sometimes violently. Layla's world darkened in 1938 with Atatürk's death. Crowds wept in Istanbul. In Ankara, Mehmet saluted his coffin in stoic silence, but Layla did not cry. Instead, she wrote, "He gave us a compass, not a map." In the decades that followed, Kyle observed Layla's evolution. She became a teacher, then a journalist, then a critic. Turkey itself became many things: NATO ally, Cold War battleground, military state, populist republic. Through Layla's eyes, Kyle witnessed coups that felt like earthquakes, economic booms that crumbled into inflation, and cultural debates that never truly ended. But she never fled, never disengaged. When journalists were jailed, she wrote in code. When students protested, she gave them books. Her loyalty was not to a regime, but to a dream that refused to die. By now, Kyle understood the deeper conflict. Turkey wasn't merely battling old versus new. It was wrestling with plural identity in a region that demanded binary definitions: East or West, Islamic or secular, traditional or modern. But Layla, and millions like her, refused to choose. They walked the edge, pulled by gravity from both sides, yet continued forward. One of Kale's final glimpses into Layla's life came during her retirement. She visited an old Ottoman cemetery, cleaned the headstone of her grandfather, an imam once dismissed during the secular purges. "I do not miss the empire," she whispered, "but I miss the memory of belief." It was not regret he heard in her voice, but reverence, for survival, for struggle, for the layered truth of her nation. Kyle paused the simulation. The complexity of Layla's journey mirrored Turkey's national arc. a refusal to be defined by either-or paradigms. That was the genius and the agony of the Republic. It had not erased the empire. It had buried it, only to find its roots still shaped the soil. The character was clear. Layla, or perhaps Turkey itself through her. The conflict was no longer mere survival, but identity. Kale noted this shift. The Ottoman concern had been existence. The Republic's concern was coherence, and the story wasn't finished. A new generation waited in the wings, digitally native, globally connected, yet fiercely local. Kyle sensed the next act would not be decided by soldiers or scribes, but by the children of both. As he disconnected, the echo of Layla's final note lingered in his neural core. We are not the bridge between worlds. We are the world they both rest on. Kyle adjusted the temporal interface, shifting the simulation forward to the early 21st century. Turkey was no longer an emerging republic testing its ideological foundation. It was now a powerful regional actor, but one burdened by contradictions. Layla had passed away, her final essays archived in a state university that once silenced her. Her students, however, were not silent. One of them, Elif, had risen into prominence, not as a politician or soldier, but as a digital anthropologist dissecting Turkey's tangled legacy in the age of algorithms. Elif's story unfolded in coded networks, online forums, campus protests, and late-night broadcasts that ducked censorship with satire. She was bold in speech, but careful in action, acutely aware of the ever-present line she must not cross. To Kyle, she represented a new archetype, one who carried the weight of history without the privilege of ignorance. She called the Republic a dream under constant negotiation and described her country as a mosaic sealed with tension. Her peers revered her. Authorities monitored her. Foreign analysts misunderstood her entirely. The central conflict had evolved again. This time, it wasn't about empire or revolution, but memory. Competing versions of history battled for dominance in textbooks, media, and family dinner tables. Kyle watched as Elif navigated these fractures. One day, she would visit a modern art gallery showcasing Ottoman calligraphy, reimagined as protest graffiti. The next, she would march against a new education bill that aimed to erase Atatürk's reforms from the curriculum. Her work wasn't just archival, it was existential. What a nation remembers it becomes. When protests erupted in Istanbul over restrictions on social freedoms, Elif didn't hold a sign. She live-streamed. Thousands watched as riot police flooded the streets. She whispered facts over the sirens, population statistics, legal precedents, historical parallels. Her voice was calm. Her signal was cut. It returned 5 minutes later through a VPN routed through Amsterdam. The internet had become her homeland. Kale noted that Elif's greatest fear wasn't authoritarianism, it was apathy. "They don't need to silence us," she once said to a colleague. "They only need us to forget." That idea echoed in her writings, that forgetting was more dangerous than censorship because it required no violence, just time, just convenience, just indifference. A surprising moment came when Elif visited a rural village in Anatolia, where her great-grandmother had once lived. The villagers were kind but suspicious. They spoke with reverence for the Sultanate, nostalgia for the empire, and frustration with urban liberals. Elif didn't argue. She listened. She recorded. Later, in a speech at a youth forum in Izmir, she quoted one of them. "We didn't lose the war. We just stopped being asked the questions." It was then Kale realized something. Turkey's story was no longer linear. It wasn't progressing from empire to republic to democracy in a clean arc. It was cycling, looping through identities, resisting definition, constantly rewriting its narrative without discarding its past. This wasn't regression. It was a survival mechanism. Elif's journey wasn't heroic in the traditional sense. She wasn't exiled, imprisoned, or immortalized. She endured. She published essays that sparked debate and received threats. She collaborated with artists in Berlin and dissidents in Tehran. She refused to choose between the East and the West. Her work was ignored, then stolen, then praised, then banned, and then taught again 5 years later under a different name. It didn't break her. It refined her. One night, Kale traced her digital footprint to a private message sent to one of her former professors. It was simple. "We are not finished, but we are aware." That phrase stayed with him longer than any grand declaration. Awareness, after all, was the greatest act of resistance in a culture constantly rewritten. As the simulation closed, Kyle reflected on the 3 lives he had followed: Suleiman the strategist, Layla the observer, Elif the resistor. Each bore the weight of their era. Each revealed a truth about identity that defied binary logic. In Turkey, power shifted hands, but identity remained a battlefield. Not because the people lacked vision, but because they possessed too many. The story could have ended there. Elif's final entry into the global archive might have been seen as closure, but Kale knew better. Turkey's story was not a book. It was a river, redirected, dammed, polluted, but never dried. It continued through every generation that dared to ask, "Who are we, really?" And for that reason alone, Kyle left the door open. The narrative wasn't concluded. It was waiting.